The silence was absolute. Commander Sarah Chun floated in the observation deck of the colony ship New Horizon, staring at the empty coordinates where New Geneva should have been. Her hands trembled against the cold metal railing as she processed what the long-range scanners were telling her. Nothing. Not even debris. "Commander," Lieutenant Torres whispered from behind her, his voice barely audible over the hum of life support systems. "The quantum communication array is picking up something. It's from Earth." Sarah's heart stopped. Earth had been silent for 3 months. The last transmission had been garbled, filled with static and what sounded like screaming. After that, nothing but the cosmic background radiation that had become humanity's funeral dirge across 7 colony worlds. She followed Torres to the communication center, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal deck plating. The New Horizon had been humanity's farthest colony ship, sent to establish a foothold in the Kepler 442 system. They were still 6 months out when the attacks began. One by one, humanity's worlds had gone dark. First Mars, then Europa Station. The outer colonies followed like dominoes falling in slow motion across the galaxy. The communication officer, a young woman named Davies whose eyes had lost their spark weeks ago, looked up as they approached. "It's fragmentary, ma'am. The signal's been bouncing around relay stations for months. But it's definitely from Earth's military command." Sarah slipped on the headset, her hands shaking as she adjusted the frequency. Static filled her ears. Then, slowly, a voice emerged from the cosmic noise. Admiral Harrison's voice, though it sounded older, more tired than she remembered. "Any surviving human vessels? This is Earth Command. Authentication code Bravo 77 Alpha. If you're receiving this, know that humanity has not fallen. Repeat, humanity has not fallen. The hegemony thought they had broken us. They were wrong." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The hegemony. Finally, a name for the monsters who had systematically exterminated every human world they could find. The Admiral's voice continued, growing stronger despite the static. "To all colonial vessels and outposts still operational, you are to implement Protocol Omega immediately. Find them, study them, learn everything about them, and then we make them pay for what they've done to our people." The transmission cut to static, then resumed. "They hit us hard and fast, thinking we were just another primitive species to be cataloged and eliminated. They destroyed our worlds, killed our families, turned our colonies into ash and radiation. But they made one crucial mistake. They let some of us live long enough to see what they really are." Sarah found herself gripping the headset so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Around her, the bridge crew had gathered in complete silence, hanging on every word of what might be humanity's final message to the stars. "We've learned their weaknesses." Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through space and time. "Their technology, their biology, their psychology. The hegemony isn't the unstoppable force they pretend to be. They're parasites. They've grown soft from centuries of easy conquests, comfortable in their superiority. They've never faced a species that could adapt as quickly as we can. They've never encountered humanity's greatest weapon, our ability to learn from pain and turn it into purpose." The Admiral paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone listening. "They wanted to wipe us out? Fine. But they should have finished the job. Because now we know who they are, where they come from, and how they think. And we're coming for them." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Protocol Omega is now in effect across all remaining human assets. We're no longer running. We're no longer hiding. We're going hunting. Every ship, every station, every human still breathing has one mission: find their homeworld and make sure they never hurt another species again. The transmission quality degraded further, but Harrison's words remained clear. "They think they know us because they've seen us die. But they haven't seen us angry. They haven't seen what happens when you back humanity into a corner and give us nothing left to lose. They're about to learn that some prey becomes predator when you push too hard." Static consumed the signal for several seconds before Harrison's voice returned, fainter now. "To the New Horizon specifically, if you're receiving this, your mission parameters have changed. The Kepler system isn't just a colony site anymore. Our deep space reconnaissance has identified it as a major hegemony way station. You're not colonists anymore, Commander Chen. You're advanced scouts for humanity's first strike back. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Kepler system was crawling with the enemy. They were heading straight into a trap that had been set months before they even knew the hegemony existed. Your ship carries more than colonists and farming equipment, Harrison continued. Check Cargo Bay 7. Authorization code Omega Black 7. Dr. Morrison will explain everything. The future of our species might depend on what you do in the next few months. Dr. Morrison. Sarah remembered him vaguely, a quiet man who kept to himself in the science section, supposedly a xenobiologist studying potential life forms in the target system. If Harrison was mentioning him specifically, there was more to his presence than anyone had known. The transmission began to fade, Harrison's voice becoming increasingly distant. They wanted to exterminate us like we were nothing. Like our children, our dreams, our entire civilization was just an inconvenience to be swept aside. They chose this war, but we're going to finish it. Earth sends its love to all our children among the stars. Make us proud. Make them pay. Harrison out. Silence returned to the bridge, broken only by the steady rhythm of the ship's systems. Sarah slowly removed the headset, her mind racing with the implications of what they'd just heard. They weren't refugees anymore. They were soldiers in a war they'd barely known they were fighting. Lieutenant Torres broke the silence first. Commander, should we alter course? If the Kepler system is hostile. Sarah shook her head. No, we continue as planned. But we go in ready for war instead of ready to plant gardens. She turned to face her crew, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. The despair that had hung over them for months was burning away, replaced by something harder and more focused. Davies, I want you to analyze every fragment of that transmission. Look for additional data, hidden frequencies, anything that might give us more information about what Earth Command learned about the hegemony. Yes, ma'am. Torres, assemble a security team and meet me at Cargo Bay 7 in 30 minutes. Full combat gear. Sarah paused, looking around at her crew. 3 months ago, they had been pioneers, dreamers ready to build a new world under alien suns. Now they were humanity's sword thrust into the heart of enemy territory. And Torres? Break out the military-grade hardware from the emergency armories. If we're going to be humanity's advance force, we're going to be properly armed. As the crew scattered to carry out her orders, Sarah remained on the bridge, staring out at the stars ahead. Somewhere in that darkness was the enemy that had murdered her species' future. But somewhere behind her was Earth, wounded but not dead, planning its revenge. She thought about her brother's family on New Geneva, her parents on Mars, the millions of human beings who had been snuffed out by creatures who saw them as nothing more than a minor obstacle to expansion. The grief was still there, would always be there. But now it had direction. The New Horizon continued its course toward the Kepler system, no longer carrying humanity's hope for a peaceful future among the stars. Instead, it carried something far more dangerous. Humanity's promise that some acts could never be forgiven, and some species should never have been underestimated. In the depths of space, a wounded civilization had just declared war on its tormentors. The hegemony had wiped out humanity's worlds, confident in their superiority and the righteousness of their cause. They were about to discover that humanity's greatest colonies had never been built on distant planets. Humanity's greatest colony was the burning desire for justice that lived in the heart of every human being who had survived their genocide. And that colony was about to go to war. Cargo Bay 7 had been sealed since launch, its contents classified at levels that required 3 separate command codes to access. Sarah stood before the massive blast door with Lieutenant Torres and Dr. Morrison, the quiet xenobiologist who had suddenly become the most important person on their ship. Dr. Morrison was younger than Sarah had expected, probably early 30s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets too heavy for his age. When she'd summoned him to the cargo bay, he'd arrived already wearing a hazmat suit and carrying a briefcase that radiated the kind of authority usually reserved for nuclear weapons. "Before we go in," Dr. Morrison said, his voice muffled by the suit's respirator, "I need you to understand something. Everything you're about to see was classified at the highest levels because Earth Command knew that one day we might need humanity's ugliest capabilities. Today is that day. Sarah entered her authorization codes, followed by Torres and Morrison. The blast doors cycled open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a chamber that definitely hadn't been in the ship's original blueprints. Banks of computer equipment lined the walls, sophisticated analysis stations that belonged in a military research facility, not a colony ship. But it was the center of the room that made Sarah's breath catch. Suspended in a crystalline containment field was something that looked like it had been torn from a nightmare. The creature was roughly humanoid, but wrong in every possible way. Its skin was a mottled gray-green that seemed to absorb light, covered in what looked like scales that shifted color as they watched. The head was elongated, almost serpentine, with clusters of eyes that even in death seemed to track movement. Most disturbing were its hands. Each finger ended in retractable claws that even now dripped with a substance that ate through the containment field's floor plating. "Meet the hegemony," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "Specifically, this is a Nexar warrior caste specimen. We captured it during the first attack on Mars before." He paused, clearly struggling with memories. Before Mars died. Torres stepped closer to the containment field, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. "This thing attacked Mars." Morrison shook his head. "This thing, and about 10,000 of its friends attacked Mars. They came in ships that looked like they were grown rather than built, using technology that our best scientists are still trying to understand. They didn't just want to kill us, Lieutenant. They wanted to study us first." Sarah walked to one of the computer terminals, seeing streams of biological data scrolling across multiple screens. DNA sequences, neural mapping, chemical analysis. It was a complete biological breakdown of an alien species. "How much do we know about them?" "More than they think," Morrison replied, moving to join her at the terminal. "The Nexar are the soldier caste of the hegemony, engineered for combat and biological warfare. But they're not the ones making decisions. That honor belongs to the pre-March caste, being so convinced of their own superiority that they've never encountered a species they couldn't simply catalog and eliminate." Morrison's fingers danced across the interface, bringing up holographic displays that showed the internal structure of the dead creature. "Look at this. Their entire biology is based on genetic manipulation and parasitic integration. They don't just conquer other species, they absorb their useful traits and discard the rest. They've been doing this for millennia, growing stronger with each civilization they devour." "Until they met us," Sarah said, beginning to understand. "Until they met us," Morrison agreed. "Humans are different. Our rate of adaptation, our psychological resilience, our tendency to become more dangerous when threatened rather than less. It doesn't fit their models. They expected us to break like every other species they've encountered. Instead, we started learning." Torres was studying tactical displays that showed hegemony ship configurations and weapon systems. "These ships, some of this technology, is organic." Morrison nodded grimly. "The hegemony grows their technology rather than building it. Their ships are alive, in a sense. Semi-sentient bioships that can repair damage, adapt to new threats, even reproduce under the right conditions. It should have made them unstoppable." "Should have?" Sarah asked. Morrison smiled for the first time since she'd known him, and it was not a pleasant expression. "They made one crucial mistake. They're so used to fighting primitive species that they've forgotten how to fight an enemy that can think. Their bioships are incredibly advanced, but they're also vulnerable in ways they never considered." He brought up another display, this one showing chemical formulas and molecular structures. "Every living thing has weaknesses, allergies, genetic vulnerabilities, biological kill switches. We've had 3 months to study this specimen and run computer models on hegemony biology. We know how to hurt them now." Sarah felt a cold smile spreading across her face. "What kind of weaknesses?" Morrison's briefcase clicked open, revealing vials of what looked like ordinary water. "The Nexar's enhanced immune system is incredibly effective against natural pathogens. But it has a fatal flaw. It can't adapt to artificial constructs designed specifically to target their altered genetics. These vials contain tailored biological weapons that will turn their enhanced immune systems against them." Torres whistled low. "Biological warfare. They started it. Morrison said flatly. Every human world they attacked was subjected to biological weapons designed to break down our immune systems and make us easier to harvest. Turnabout is fair play. Sarah studied the readouts, seeing the elegant lethality of what Morrison had created. How effective is this? In controlled tests, 100% fatal to Nexar physiology within 6 hours of exposure. The beauty is that their bioships share similar biological markers. We can kill the ships and the crews with the same weapon. Morrison moved to another terminal, bringing up star charts that showed the Kepler system in detail. But that's just the beginning. Earth Command didn't just send me to create weapons. They sent me to find the hegemony's homeworld. The star chart zoomed in, showing a complex network of space routes and facility markers. The Nexar aren't native to this galaxy. They came from somewhere else, following routes that lead back through a series of dimensional gateways. The Kepler system isn't just a way station, it's a major junction point for their entire transportation network. Sarah's tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. If we can map their routes, we can follow them home, Morrison finished. And we can use their own transportation network to deliver presents they'll never forget. Torres was studying the biological weapon specifications with the eye of a soldier. How do we deploy this? We're one ship against what looks like a major military installation. Morrison's smile became positively predatory. We don't deploy it. We let them capture it. Sarah turned from the displays to study Morrison's face. Explain. The hegemony's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They can't resist studying new species. When they encounter something they haven't seen before, their first instinct is to capture, analyze, and catalog it before elimination. They'll want to bring samples of humanity back to their bioships for detailed study. Morrison gestured to the vials in his briefcase. These weapons are designed to remain dormant until exposed to specific biological triggers that are only present in hegemony biolaboratories. Once they start studying human tissue samples, the weapons activate and spread through their entire ship network. Sarah was beginning to see the plan's elegant brutality. We make ourselves irresistible as research subjects. Exactly. We let them capture some of our people, knowing that those people are carrying biological time bombs that will activate once the hegemony starts their experiments. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late. Torres looked up from his tactical analysis. That's assuming they take prisoners instead of just killing us all outright. Morrison shook his head. They will take prisoners. Their intelligence reports suggest they're particularly interested in human neural patterns and psychological resilience. We're a puzzle they can't solve, and that makes us irresistible to them. Sarah walked back to the containment field, studying the dead Nexar warrior. In life, it had probably been nearly unstoppable, faster, stronger, and better armed than any human soldier. But it was also predictable in ways that its creators had never imagined. How many of our people would we need to sacrifice for this plan to work? She asked quietly. Morrison's expression grew somber. In the worst-case scenario, all of them. The biological weapons are designed to activate even if the volunteer doesn't survive the initial capture. As long as they bring human tissue back to their bioships for study, the weapons will deploy. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of her crew. They had signed up to build a new world, not to die as biological weapons in humanity's war for revenge. But they had also lost everything they had ever loved to the creatures who considered humans nothing more than an interesting specimen to be eliminated. Commander, Torres said quietly, if this works, if we can really follow them back to their homeworld, we can deliver Earth's response to their genocide, Sarah finished. We can make sure they never hurt another species again. Morrison packed his vials carefully back into the briefcase. The choice is yours, Commander. We can try to run, hope we can find some empty system where the hegemony will never find us. Or we can make them pay for what they did to our people. Sarah looked around the cargo bay at the technology that humanity had built in the depths of its pain and rage. 3 months ago, the idea of biological warfare against an alien species would have horrified her. But 3 months ago, she had never seen the orbital bombardment footage from New Geneva. She had never listened to the final transmissions from Europa Station as the children's section was breached. Lieutenant Torres, I want volunteers only. Anyone who wants to be part of this mission volunteers. Anyone who wants to try to find refuge in deep space can take the escape pods. But I want everyone to understand exactly what we're proposing. Torres nodded. And you, Commander? What's your choice? Sarah turned back to the dead Nexar, its alien eyes seeming to mock her even in death. In those eyes, she saw every human child who would never grow up, every family that had been torn apart, every dream that had been cut short by creatures who saw humanity as nothing more than an inconvenience. The hegemony wanted to wipe out our worlds, she said quietly. Let's show them what happens when you try to exterminate a species that's too stubborn to die quietly. The Kepler system revealed itself slowly as the New Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Sarah stood on the bridge watching the sensor displays paint a picture that chilled her blood. The system wasn't just occupied, it was transformed. Where their surveys had shown a collection of barren planets suitable for terraforming, now massive bioships orbited in complex patterns. The vessels looked like they had been grown from some cosmic nightmare, their organic hulls pulsing with internal light. Each ship was easily the size of a city, their surfaces covered in what looked like breathing coral that shifted and changed color as they watched. Tactical analysis, Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. Lieutenant Torres worked his console with practiced efficiency. 17 major bioships, Commander. Each one is approximately 8 kilometers long. I'm detecting hundreds of smaller vessels, probably fighter equivalents. And there's something else. The main screen shifted to show a massive structure orbiting what should have been Kepler 442b. It looked like a space station, but organic like the ships. Tentacle-like extensions reached out for thousands of kilometers, connecting to smaller structures that pulsed with energy. It's a gateway, Dr. Morrison said from his position at the science station. That's how they're moving between galaxies. The energy readings are off the charts. That thing could probably transport their entire fleet instantaneously. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the movement patterns of the bioships. They're not in a defensive formation. They're harvesting. Torres enhanced the sensor resolution, revealing the horrible truth. The bioships were systematically dismantling the planets themselves, breaking them down into their component materials and absorbing them into their organic hulls. What had once been worlds were now asteroid fields being processed by creatures that treated entire solar systems as raw materials. Commander, Communications Officer Davies spoke up, her voice tight with tension. I'm detecting transmissions between the bioships. The language is completely alien, but the transmission patterns suggest they're not aware of our presence yet. How long before they detect us? Sarah asked. Morrison consulted his instruments. Their scanning technology appears to be biologically based, different signature patterns than our electronic systems. We might have hours before they notice us, or they might already know we're here and are just waiting to see what we do. Sarah turned to address her crew. 8 hours earlier, she had given them a choice. Stay and fight as humanity's advance force, or take the escape pods and try to find refuge in deep space. Not a single person had chosen to run. Her crew of colonists had transformed themselves into soldiers united by grief and the desire for justice. All right, people, this is what we came here to do. Morrison, how long do you need to prepare the biological weapons? They're already prepared, Commander. The volunteers have been dosed with dormant agents that will activate once the hegemony begins their biological analysis. The weapons are designed to look like natural human bacteria until triggered. Sarah nodded, then activated the ship-wide communication system. This is the Commander. In approximately 30 minutes, we will begin humanity's first strike back against the creatures that destroyed our worlds. Some of us will not survive the next few hours. But if we succeed, we will have given humanity the tools it needs to make sure the hegemony never hurts another species again. She paused, looking around the bridge at faces that had aged years in the past few months. The plan is simple. We make ourselves irresistible as research subjects. The hegemony has never encountered humans before, and their psychological profiles suggest they can't resist studying new species. They will capture us, analyze us, and, in doing so, doom themselves. Dr. Morrison stood to address the crew. The biological agents you've been given are completely dormant until exposed to specific hegemony biolaboratory conditions. Once triggered, they will spread through their ship networks faster than their immune systems can adapt. We estimate total systemic failure within 6 hours of initial activation. Lieutenant Torres brought up the tactical display. Our job is to make them want to capture us alive. Intelligence suggests the hegemony prefers live subjects for neural and psychological analysis. We need to appear threatening enough to be interesting, but not so dangerous that they decide to eliminate us from a distance. Sarah smiled grimly. In other words, we need to annoy them just enough to get their attention. The bridge crew chuckled, a sound that carried more determination than humor. They were about to deliberately provoke creatures that had casually exterminated entire civilizations. But they were also carrying humanity's promise of revenge in their very cells. Begin the approach, Sarah ordered. Make us visible. I want them to know we're here. The New Horizon altered course, moving directly toward the largest concentration of bioships. Almost immediately, the alien vessels began to respond. Their organic hulls brightened with internal light, and Sarah could see what looked like weapons systems extending from their surfaces like blooming flowers. "Commander," Davies reported, "the bioships are hailing us. The translation matrix is working on their language, but it's unlike anything in our databases." The main screen flickered, then resolved into an image that made Sarah's blood freeze. The creature addressing them was clearly related to the dead specimen in Cargo Bay 7, but this one was alive and radiating an intelligence that was both alien and terrifyingly familiar. The being's elongated head tilted as it studied them, its cluster of eyes tracking movement with predatory focus. When it spoke, the translation system rendered its words in a voice that carried harmonics that set human teeth on edge. "Unknown vessel. You intrude upon hegemony space without authorization. Your species is not cataloged in our records. This is unexpected." Sarah stepped forward, keeping her expression neutral. "This is Commander Sarah Chun of the human vessel New Horizon. We are explorers from a species you may not have encountered before." The creature's eyes seemed to focus on her with increased intensity. "Humans." The way it pronounced the word made it sound like a biological specimen classification. "Curious. Our scouts have reported encounters with your kind in distant systems, but our analysis remains incomplete." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The hegemony knew about the attacks on human worlds, but this creature was speaking as if humans were just another interesting discovery rather than a species they had attempted to genocide. "We are peaceful explorers," she lied smoothly. "We seek only to establish contact with other intelligent species." The creature's expression, insofar as its alien features could be read, seemed almost amused. "Peaceful. Yes, that matches our preliminary observations. Your species appears to possess unusual psychological characteristics that warrant further study." Morrison stepped up beside Sarah, playing his role as a curious scientist. "We would welcome the opportunity to exchange knowledge with a civilization as advanced as yours." The creature's cluster of eyes focused on Morrison with what looked like interest. "Exchange. An interesting concept. However, our protocols require complete biological and psychological analysis before any form of communication can proceed. This is for the safety of both our species." Sarah exchanged a glance with Torres, who was monitoring the tactical situation. More bioships were moving into position around them, but so far they hadn't powered up their weapons systems. The hegemony was treating them exactly as Morrison had predicted, as an interesting specimen to be cataloged. "What would such an analysis involve?" Sarah asked, knowing the answer would determine whether their plan succeeded or failed. The creature gestured with hands that ended in those familiar retractable claws. "Standard procedure. We will transport representatives of your species to our research facilities for complete biological and neural mapping. The process is quite painless, and the subjects are typically returned to their vessels within several cycles." Sarah almost laughed at the casual lie. The hegemony had no intention of returning anyone they captured. But the fact that they were proposing to take live subjects meant the plan was working. "How many of our people would you need for this analysis?" she asked. "Initially, perhaps 10 to 15 specimens should provide adequate data. We are particularly interested in your species' apparent psychological resilience. Our preliminary observations suggest humans respond to stress in ways that do not match standard biological models." Torres stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. "Commander, I volunteer for the analysis team." Morrison nodded. "As do I. This could be an unprecedented opportunity for scientific exchange." Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew, seeing the same determination in every face. They all knew what volunteering meant. They were choosing to become biological weapons, to sacrifice themselves in the hope that their deaths would give humanity the tools it needed for revenge. "Very well," Sarah told the creature on the screen. "I will lead a team of 15 volunteers to your research facility." The creature's eyes seemed to brighten with what might have been anticipation. "Excellent. We will dispatch a transport to collect your specimens immediately. Please prepare them for biological containment protocols." The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in silence. Sarah turned to her crew, seeing her own grim determination reflected in their faces. "All right, people. This is it. Morrison, how long before the weapons activate once they begin their analysis?" "The moment they expose human tissue to their biolaboratory environment, the dormant agents will begin to spread. Total ship network contamination within 4 to 6 hours. Sarah nodded. "Torres, select your team. Remember, we need to survive long enough for them to begin their analysis, but not so long that we risk exposure of the plan." As her crew prepared for what might be their final mission, Sarah looked out at the bioships that surrounded them. The hegemony thought they were capturing interesting specimens for study. They had no idea they were about to invite humanity's revenge directly into their hearts. The creatures that had casually exterminated human worlds were about to learn that some species should never be underestimated. They were about to discover that humans were not just another primitive species to be cataloged and eliminated. They were about to find out what happened when you tried to wipe out a species that had spent months planning their revenge. The hegemony transport ship was a living nightmare that defied every principle of engineering Sarah had ever learned. The walls pulsed with a rhythmic heartbeat, and the floor felt warm and slightly yielding beneath their feet. Bioluminescent veins ran through the organic hull, providing light that shifted color as they watched. Sarah led her team of 15 volunteers through corridors that seemed to breathe around them. Behind her walked Lieutenant Torres, Dr. Morrison, and 12 others who had chosen to become humanity's final weapon. Each carried within their bodies dormant biological agents that would activate the moment the hegemony began their analysis. Their escort was a group of Nexar warriors, the soldier caste creatures that had torn through human defenses on a dozen worlds. Up close, they were even more terrifying than the dead specimen in Cargo Bay 7. Their scaled skin shifted color with their emotions, their cluster of eyes tracked movement with predatory intensity, and their claws dripped with substances that corroded the deck plating where they walked. "Fascinating," Dr. Morrison whispered, studying their captors with the eye of a scientist even as they marched toward what would likely be their deaths. "Their entire biology is designed for adaptation and integration of foreign biological material. No wonder they've been so successful at absorbing other species." One of the Nexar guards turned at the sound of his voice, its eyes focusing on Morrison with what might have been curiosity. When it spoke, the translation came through their neural implants in that same tooth-rattling harmonic that had characterized their first contact. "The science cast specimen speaks of biology. Interesting. You possess knowledge of biological systems." Morrison nodded carefully. "I am a xenobiologist. I study life forms from different worlds." The creature's scales shifted to a brighter pattern, apparently indicating pleasure or interest. "Excellent. The pre-march will be particularly interested in your neural patterns. Few species possess individuals specialized in biological analysis of other life forms." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The hegemony wasn't just interested in human biology, they were specifically interested in human scientists. Morrison's expertise would make him an even more valuable subject for their experiments. They passed through chambers that served purposes Sarah couldn't even guess at. One room contained what looked like a garden of living crystals that pulsed with internal light. Another held pools of liquid that moved with its own current, occasionally forming tentacle-like appendages that reached toward the ceiling. "This entire ship is alive," Torres muttered, his soldiers' instincts clearly unsettled by the alien environment. "It's not just biological technology, it's a living organism." Their escort led them deeper into the ship's core, where the walls became more translucent, and They could see the vessel's internal organs functioning around them. Massive hearts pumped bioluminescent fluid through arteries the size of subway tunnels. Neural networks sparked with electrical activity as the ship's brain processed information from thousands of sensory organs. Finally, they arrived at what could only be described as a laboratory, though it bore no resemblance to any human research facility. The chamber was vast, its organic walls lined with alcoves that contained specimens from dozens of different worlds. Sarah recognized some as being vaguely humanoid, but others were so alien that her mind struggled to process their basic structure. At the center of the chamber stood a creature that was clearly different from the Nexar guards. This being was taller, more graceful, with skin that seemed to shift between different textures as they watched. Its head was larger, more developed, and its eyes held an intelligence that was both brilliant and utterly alien. "I am Pre-March Vextor," the creature announced, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in their bones. "I welcome you to our research facility. You represent the most interesting specimens we have encountered in several cycles." Sarah stepped forward, maintaining her role as a peaceful explorer even though every instinct screamed at her to attack the creature that represented everything that had destroyed her people. "We are honored to participate in this scientific exchange." Vextor's expression, insofar as it could be read, seemed amused. "Exchange implies mutual benefit. Your role here is somewhat more limited. You will provide data that will allow us to better understand your species before we complete our cataloging process." Morrison stepped up beside Sarah. "Cataloging process?" "Standard procedure," Vextor explained with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "Once we have analyzed your biological and psychological characteristics, we will determine which traits are worth preserving and which represent evolutionary dead ends. Useful genetic material will be integrated into our own biology. The rest will be discarded." The casual way the Pre-March discussed genocide made Sarah's blood boil, but she forced herself to remain calm. The biological weapons they carried would only activate once the hegemony began their analysis. Until then, they needed to play their roles as cooperative subjects. "How long does the analysis typically take?" Torres asked. Vextor gestured to the alcoves around them, each containing the remains of what had once been a thinking being. "For simple species, a few cycles. For more complex organisms, longer. Your species appears to possess unusual characteristics that will require extended study." The Pre-March moved to a control station that looked like it had grown from the ship's floor, its surface covered with organs that responded to touch with bioluminescent patterns. "We will begin with basic biological sampling. Please remain calm. The process is generally painless." The floor beneath their feet began to shift, forming restraints that grew around their ankles and wrists. Sarah felt organic bonds wrap around her arms, surprisingly gentle but utterly unyielding. Around her, her team submitted to the restraints without resistance, knowing that their mission required them to become willing subjects. "Fascinating," Vextor murmured as displays around the chamber began showing biological readings from the captured humans. "Your species' neural patterns are remarkably complex. Most species become docile once they understand their situation, but your brain activity suggests active planning even under restraint." Morrison smiled slightly. "Human beings are naturally curious. Even in dangerous situations, we tend to analyze and adapt." "Yes," Vextor agreed, its scales shifting to what appeared to be pleasure. "This trait has been noted in our encounters with your species on other worlds. Your people continued fighting even when defeat was inevitable. Most illogical, but intriguing from a biological perspective." The Pre-March approached Sarah, examining her with the detached interest of a scientist studying an interesting insect. "You appear to be the leadership specimen. Your neural patterns show complex decision-making processes even now. Tell me, what are you planning?" Sarah looked directly into the creature's alien eyes. "I'm planning to make sure you never hurt another species again." Vextor's expression seemed genuinely puzzled. "Hurt? We do not hurt other species. We simply process them according to their evolutionary value. Those with useful traits are preserved within our collective biology. Those without are returned to base elements for more productive use." "You're talking about genocide," Torres said flatly. "We are talking about efficiency," Vextor corrected. "The universe is vast, but finite. Resources are limited. Allowing primitive species to waste valuable materials on their crude civilizations is inefficient. We represent billions of years of evolutionary refinement. It is only logical that we should inherit the resources of lesser species. The casual way the pre-march dismissed the value of entire civilizations made Sarah want to scream. Instead, she forced herself to remain calm. The biological weapons were designed to activate once the hegemony began invasive analysis. She could see preparation beginning around the chamber as various organic instruments extended from the walls. Begin with neural mapping. Vextor ordered the chamber's systems. I want complete psychological profiles before we proceed to genetic analysis. Tendrils emerged from the walls, approaching each of the captured humans with probe-like appendages that ended in what looked like organic needles. Sarah felt the first probe make contact with her skin, a slight stinging sensation followed by a warm numbness as alien biology began its work. Interesting, Vextor murmured as data began flowing across the organic displays. Your species shows remarkable psychological resilience. Even under analysis, your neural patterns suggest active resistance rather than submission. Morrison smiled as a probe extracted tissue samples from his arm. Doctor, you have no idea how resilient we can be. Unknown to Vextor, the moment the first tissue sample entered the ship's biological analysis system, humanity's revenge began to unfold. The dormant agents Morrison had engineered began to activate, recognizing the specific biochemical signature of hegemony biolaboratory conditions. The weapons were designed to be undetectable until triggered, appearing to be nothing more than normal human bacteria. But, once activated, they began to reproduce at an exponential rate, spreading through the ship's organic systems faster than the hegemony's immune responses could adapt. Neural mapping complete, announced one of the Nexar technicians. Beginning genetic sequencing. More probes extended from the walls, this time drawing blood samples and tissue cultures that would provide the hegemony with complete human genetic profiles. With each sample taken, more biological weapons activated and began their deadly work. Vextor studied the genetic displays with growing excitement. Remarkable. Your species possesses genetic flexibility that we have rarely encountered. The ability to adapt and modify behavior patterns in response to environmental stress. This trait would be invaluable for integration into our collective biology. Sarah watched the displays showing her team's biological data being analyzed by alien systems that had no idea they were infected. The weapons Morrison had created were spreading through the ship's organic network like wildfire. But the hegemony's instruments weren't designed to detect artificial biological constructs. There is one thing I don't understand, Sarah said, knowing that time was running out for both her team and their captors. If you're so advanced, why do you need to steal from other species? Why not develop your own capabilities? Vextor's scales shifted to what appeared to be condescension. Evolution is a slow process, even for a species as advanced as ourselves. It is far more efficient to simply acquire useful traits from other species rather than wait millennia for natural development. We are the inheritors of thousands of species' evolutionary advantages, and the original owners of those advantages returned to base elements and recycled into more useful forms. Nothing is wasted in our system. Torres laughed, a sound that carried no humor whatsoever. You know what's funny about that? You're about to find out what happens when you try to steal from a species that's better at war than you are. Vextor's expression became puzzled. Your species is clearly primitive. Your technology is crude, your social organization chaotic. What possible advantage could you possess over the hegemony? Sarah smiled as alarms began to sound throughout the bioship's organic systems. The biological weapons had reached critical mass and were beginning to cause systemic failures throughout the vessel's living infrastructure. We're very good at holding grudges, she said quietly. And we never forget our debts. The reckoning had begun. The first sign that something was wrong came from the bioship's nervous system itself. The bioluminescent veins that ran through the walls began pulsing erratically, their usual steady rhythm becoming chaotic and desperate. The organic floor beneath their feet started to feel feverish, and the air began to carry a scent like burning copper. Pre-March Vextor turned from the genetic displays to study the ship's internal monitoring systems. its scales shifting to patterns that Sarah was beginning to recognize as confusion and growing alarm. The ship's immune system is reporting widespread contamination, Vextor announced, its voice losing the casual confidence it had carried moments before. Some form of pathogen has entered our biological networks. Dr. Morrison smiled as another tissue sample was extracted from his arm. Pathogen is such a harsh word. I prefer to think of them as involuntary colonists. After all, you invited us aboard. The Primarch's cluster of eyes fixed on Morrison with sudden intensity. You are responsible for this contamination. We all are, Morrison replied calmly. Every human on this ship is carrying biological agents specifically designed to interact with hegemony biosystems. The moment you began your analysis, you activated them. Vextor moved to the control systems, its hands dancing over the organic interface with increasing desperation. Impossible. Our scanning detected no unusual biological signatures. Your species appeared to carry only normal bacterial flora. Because that's exactly what they were until you started experimenting on us, Sarah said, watching the displays around the chamber begin to flicker and fail. We designed the weapons to remain completely dormant until exposed to the specific biochemical conditions of your biolaboratories. The ship shuddered around them, its living walls contracting as if in pain. Through the translucent sections of the hull, Sarah could see the vessel's internal organs beginning to shut down. The massive hearts that had pumped bioluminescent fluid through the ship's arteries were now struggling, their rhythm becoming irregular and weak. Torres watched the chaos with satisfaction. You know what the best part is? Your own immune systems are spreading our weapons faster than we ever could have managed alone. Every time your bioship tries to fight the infection, it just carries the agents to new systems. Alarms were now sounding throughout the vessel, organic klaxons that seemed to scream in harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. Through the chamber's viewing ports, Sarah could see other bioships in the hegemony fleet beginning to show signs of distress. Their organic hulls were developing dark patches, and their movement patterns were becoming erratic. How? Vextor demanded, its scales now showing what could only be panic. How are our other vessels being contaminated? The agents were introduced only to this ship. Morrison's smile was predatory. Because you're all connected, aren't you? Your bioships communicate through organic networks, sharing information and biological data. The moment you uploaded our genetic profiles to your fleet databases, you distributed the weapons to every vessel in your armada. The truth hit Vextor like a physical blow. The hegemony's greatest strength, their interconnected biological networks that allowed instant communication and coordination across vast fleets, had become the vector for their own destruction. Impossible, the Primarch whispered, but its certainty was cracking. Our immune systems are designed to adapt to any biological threat. We have incorporated the defenses of thousands of species. Your immune systems are designed to fight natural pathogens, Sarah said, feeling the organic restraints around her wrists beginning to weaken as the ship's biological systems failed. These agents aren't natural. They're artificial constructs created specifically to target your enhanced genetics. Your immune systems can't adapt because they don't recognize the threat until it's too late. The chamber around them was beginning to die. The organic walls were losing their bioluminescence, the living instruments were shutting down, and the specimens in their alcoves were beginning to decompose as the ship's life support systems failed. Vextor made one last desperate attempt to save its vessel, connecting directly to the ship's neural networks through organic interfaces that grew from its fingertips. For a moment, its consciousness merged with the dying bioship's mind, and Sarah could see the true scope of the disaster through its expression of absolute horror. 17 ships, Vextor whispered. The contamination has reached all 17 vessels. The agents are spreading through the gateway network. They're reaching our stations and other systems. Morrison nodded with satisfaction. The weapons are designed to use your own transportation networks against you. Every time one of your bioships connects to your gateway system, it carries the infection to new locations. By now, your entire network is compromised. The Primarch's connection to the ship's mind showed it something that made its scales turn a sickly gray color. The homeworld. The contamination is reaching the homeworld. Sarah felt the organic restraints around her wrists finally fail completely as the ship's biological systems shut down. Around her, her team was also freeing themselves from bonds that no longer had the strength to hold them. "Good," she said simply. "Now you know how it feels to watch your world die." Vextor disconnected from the failing neural network and turned to face the humans, its expression carrying a mixture of rage and dawning understanding. "You planned this. From the moment you entered our space, you planned our destruction. From the moment you destroyed our first world," Torres corrected, his hand now resting on a sidearm that no longer mattered in the face of what they had unleashed. "You wanted to study human psychology? Here's your data. Humans don't forget. We don't forgive. And when you hurt our people, we make sure it never happens again." The bio-ship was dying around them, its organic systems shutting down one by one. The air was becoming thick and difficult to breathe as the vessel's atmospheric processors failed. Through the chamber's viewing ports, Sarah could see the other ships in the hegemony fleet beginning to break apart, their organic hulls rupturing as internal systems collapsed. "This is genocide," Vextor accused, its voice carrying harmonics of despair. "You are destroying an entire civilization." Morrison laughed, a sound that carried no warmth whatsoever. "We're returning a favor. You wiped out our worlds, killed our families, turned our children into dust. Now you get to experience what that feels like." "We are not a primitive species to be cataloged and eliminated," Sarah added. "We are humanity. We are the species that builds weapons out of our own bodies and delivers them gift-wrapped to our enemies. We are the species that turns your greatest strengths into your deadliest weaknesses." Vextor's legs gave out beneath it as the chamber's floor began to lose structural integrity. The Premarch fell to its knees, its scales now showing patterns of defeat and despair. "The hegemony has existed for millions of years. We have absorbed the knowledge and capabilities of thousands of species. We cannot simply end." "Every empire ends," Torres said quietly. "Usually they end when they encounter something they can't understand. You couldn't understand why humans kept fighting when fighting was hopeless. You couldn't understand why we got stronger instead of weaker when you pushed us. And you definitely couldn't understand that some species are willing to die to make sure their enemies die with them." The organic displays around the chamber were showing the death of an entire civilization. Ship after ship was going dark as the biological weapons spread through the hegemony's network. Space stations that had existed for millennia were losing power as their biosystems collapsed. Even the massive gateway structure that connected this system to the hegemony's home galaxy was beginning to show signs of systemic failure. "Your homeworld," Sarah said, watching the data streams that Vextor's connection had revealed. "How many of your people are there?" "Billions," Vextor whispered. "The crown jewel of our civilization. The center of our network." "Not anymore," Morrison said with cold satisfaction. "The agents are designed to survive in space, to spread through any biological system they encounter. Your homeworld's biosphere will be completely compromised within days." Vextor looked up at the humans with eyes that held a terrible understanding. "You have destroyed us all. Every hegemony world, every station, every ship. The network that took us millions of years to build will be gone within a solar rotation." Sarah felt no pity for the creature that represented the species that had murdered her family. "Good. Maybe the next time your people encounter a new species, you'll remember what happened to the hegemony and decide that genocide isn't such a good idea after all." The chamber was beginning to decompose around them as the bioship's death entered its final stages. The organic walls were sloughing away, revealing the vessel's internal structure as it collapsed in on itself. Through the failing hull, Sarah could see space beckoning, cold, clean, and free of the nightmare that had consumed the galaxy for millennia. "The escape pods," Torres said, pointing to organic vessels that were beginning to separate from the dying bioship. "The ship's automated systems are trying to save the crew." Sarah nodded. It was time to leave. They had accomplished everything they came to do. Humanity's revenge was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire, consuming the civilization that had tried to wipe them out. The hegemony's interconnected networks, once their greatest strength, had become the vector for their complete destruction. As they made their way toward the escape pods, Vextor's voice called out behind them, carrying harmonics of desperate pleading. "Wait! The knowledge we possess, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of species, it cannot be allowed to die with us." some form of compensation, some way to preserve what we have learned. Sarah turned back to face the dying pre-March, her expression carrying all the warmth of absolute zero. The knowledge you stole from the species you murdered? The wisdom you gained from civilizations you exterminated? Let it die with you. The universe will be better for its loss. The escape pod separated from the dying bioship, just as the vessel's central nervous system finally collapsed. Through the pod's organic viewport, Sarah watched the hegemony fleet tear itself apart, each ship succumbing to the biological weapons that turned their own enhanced genetics against them. In the distance, the massive gateway structure was beginning to collapse in on itself, its organic components failing as the infection spread through its bionetworks. When it finally died, it would take with it the hegemony's ability to travel between galaxies, stranding any surviving elements of their civilization in dead systems scattered across the cosmos. Morrison activated the escape pod's communication systems, sending a message that would reach any surviving human vessels in the galaxy. This is Dr. Morrison aboard Hegemony escape vessel. The biological weapons have been successfully deployed. The Hegemony network is experiencing total systemic failure. Repeat, the Hegemony network is dying. He paused, then added with quiet satisfaction, Earth has returned the favor. The pod's systems detected the new horizon approaching, its human crew ready to pick up the survivors of humanity's first successful strike back against their tormentors. Behind them, the Kepler system was becoming a graveyard of bioships and organic stations that had once threatened the entire galaxy. Sarah looked out at the stars ahead, knowing that somewhere in that darkness, other human vessels were receiving their signal. The plan had worked. The hegemony was dead or dying across thousands of systems. The species that had casually exterminated human worlds had learned too late that humanity was not just another primitive civilization to be cataloged and eliminated. They had encountered a species that could turn genocide into suicide, that could weaponize their own biology, that could make their enemies' greatest strengths into their most fatal weaknesses. The hegemony had wiped out humanity's worlds. Earth had returned the favor across the stars, and humanity had made sure it would never happen again.